As you all know, there has been the ongoing battle of whether or not it is fair for biologically born men to compete in women's sports. Now, I have personally avoided speaking on this issue because we no longer live in a society that is ruled by scientific fact and truth. Hence, what is the point of trying to express proven scientific fact to people who adhere only to the postmodern mindset that truth is only whatever they say it is? Well, let's talk about that. Plato once said, "A wise man speaks because he has something to say, a fool because he has to say something." Now, I do not consider myself to be a scholar, but what I take from the substance of what Plato is saying here is that the difference between a wise man and a fool is that the wise man speaks from the knowledge of that which is true, while the fool does not. In simpler terms, the wise man knows what he is talking about, while the fool just makes up his own truth so to justify whatever it is that he wants to believe. Now, as we've all been able to see over this past decade or so in the endless congressional and senatorial hearings there have been, and within the countless debates broadcasted on mainstream media, the most basic question concerning the differences in men and women just will not be answered by those on the political left who advocate for biologically born men to be able to compete in women's sports. And because of that, those in positions of leadership seem to be unable to get to a place where the issue can be resolved. Now, let's be honest. The reason that those on the left do not want to answer that basic question is because they are fully aware that should they acknowledge the truth, then it would completely destroy their attempts to redefine what is scientifically proven just so they can create their own reality, their own belief system that is not bound by the expectation of proven fact. Let's take a look at this video of Ted Cruz questioning LGBTQ activist and human rights campaign president Kelly Robinson that clearly demonstrates his point. And by the way, shout out to Forbes News on YouTube for this video, and make sure that you check them out as they are a great channel for information.
Ms. Robinson, do you agree with Ms. Gaines that there's a difference between women and men?
If the question is about trans women,
I'm just asking, is there a difference between women and men?
what I can say is that the NCAA has rules in place. They've had rules in place for the last decade, and when this competition
I'm going to try
the
again.
rules were clear.
Do you believe there's a difference between women and men? It's a yes/no question. Do you believe there's a difference?
Oh, I think that we're talking about this case with the NCAA.
No, I'm asking a question. Do you believe there's a difference between women and men? Most people could answer this very simply. I'm curious if you're willing to do so.
Oh, absolutely. I'm just putting it into the context of the conversation
yes?
that we're having. I think that there are definitions related to sex.
Is that a yes? So I'm trying to get a yes or no. I'm not trying to get a speech. Is there a difference between women and men?
I think that there are definitions for biological sex.
Okay, so you're not answering that. Let me ask you this question then. Why do women's sports exist? If you can't define a difference between women and men, why not abolish women's sports and just tell little girls to swim with little boys and see who wins?
Oh, I'm simply saying that that sex
My
is different
question,
than gender.
Why
and I do believe
why
that
do
women's sports have a great
exist?
value. I mean, Senator, I'll tell you right
Ms.
now.
Robinson, please answer the question I'm asking you.
Absolutely.
Why do women's sports exist?
I think that there are so many positive benefits to sports.
But why have a separate category for women? If there's no difference between women and men, why have women's sports?
I'm saying that there's a difference between sex and gender, and that the NCAA has rules in place, which they have for the last decade.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to enter into the record an article from Duke Law called Comparing Athletic Performances for the Best Elite Women to Boys and Men. And it goes through examining in 2017 the top records for women in the world in various track and field events. So, for example, in the 100 meter, the top record for women in the world was 10.71 seconds. Now, that record for the number one woman in the world in 2017 was, in the year 2017, broken by 124 boys under 18. In that same year, the record for the number one competing woman in the 100 meter dash in the world was broken by a total of 2,474 men.
So clearly you can see how simple the question being asked is. Is there a difference between women and men? And of course, that question is relevant because if indeed the feminist and transgender argument is valid that there is no difference between the two, then logically that leads to his point of why then do we even have women's sports? Why do we just not have boys and girls, women and men all be put together? But the refusal of those on the left to answer this basic question is why it is that our politicians can't seem to get to resolving this issue. After all, to move on to the next stage of any issue, one must first be able to answer the question on the first stage. That question again being, is there an acknowledged difference between a man and a woman? That answer is necessary because once that question is answered, then they can move on and question other things. Things like, how then does that answer affect women's sports? That answer then leads to the next question of, if then it does affect what is fair towards biological women in sports, then what must we do to ensure that we protect true fairness? But they refuse to answer the question because they know that if they do, then they will be unable to avoid the outcome that the application of logic and truth must result in. And we all know that the rule of honesty reveals that when a person refuses to acknowledge something that we all know to be true, then it is because that person is clearly attempting to avoid the truth so they don't have to comply with it. As an example, how often do we hear those in a relationship that have been caught cheating saying things like, I did it because my partner drove me to it? It is just gaslighting. It is an attempt to change what is true just to justify themselves and continue advocating for their own personal agenda. It is simply the attempt to not have to be responsible in admitting what is true because they know that doing so would invalidate their views and completely dismantle the hope they have to bring about their agenda. As the leaders of our country, fear of the truth should never be an issue when deciding what is right. Yet how absolutely pathetic is it when a truth that has been understood from the beginning of time, in this case, the elementary question, is there a difference between a man and a woman, cannot be answered? How frightening is it that some of the most educated men and women of our time, political leaders, doctors, lawyers, teachers, deny so easily the simplest of scientific fact, despite there being an abundance of evidence available to substantiate it? How concerning is it that these people who adamantly deny what a 3-year-old knows in this question are those who are making the most important decisions for our country? In the video you just watched, Ted Cruz quotes the following from an article from Duke Law, which states this concerning their research and the differences between men and women in the sport of track and field. He says, in 2017, in the women's 100-meter dash, the top record for women in the world was 10.71 seconds. In the same year of 2017, that record was broken by 124 boys under the age of 18. Again, that is young boys in comparison to grown women. He goes on to say that in the same year, that record for the top woman in the world of 10.71 seconds was broken by 2,474 adult men, therein demonstrating how much more easily grown men were able to break the top woman's record. There are countless more examples of how men and women are different in sport, but none of which takes away from the importance, significance, or value of who a woman is as a person or in what a woman can offer to our society. But to be so unwilling to admit how certain distinct differences between men and women can directly affect things such as sports is to display a purposed ignorance that is, quite frankly, inexcusable. Not to mention how immensely embarrassed said person should be due to their public display of demonstrating themselves as the literal definition of Plato's fool. Yet it is this type of purposed ignorance that really prevents the necessary resolve needed to move forward. We supposedly are intellectually and technologically more advanced than we have ever been before. Yet those leaders on the left who are called upon to answer such a basic question still refuse to accept that truth is more important than agenda. That in any democratic society, it is simply impossible to please everyone. To continue to advance and to do what is right as a society, we cannot be a people who reject scientific fact just to promote something that simply isn't true. And yes, not everyone is going to get what they as an individual may want. But the truth is that reality is not subjective, and we cannot expect to better our society if we are given more to fantasy than we are to truth. Just because I choose to live a certain way, It doesn't mean that all of science and truth should be discarded so I can be given what I think I should have, what I think is fair for me. I definitely should not expect that everyone else has to give up what is right and proven just so I can have what I want. The bottom line is this: like it or not, we all have to live in a society where not everyone gets to have what it is that they may want. In light of that, isn't it best for us all if we can at least be sure that the decisions our leaders make for our country will be those which are made upon the foundation of truth and scientific fact and not fantasy? Anyone who is older than 20 should be able to easily see how chaotic and divided our country has become due to this trend of denouncing scientific fact and truth just for agenda. And think about this: how much worse will it not get over the coming years if we continue down this rabbit hole of denying truth in exchange for fantasy? This issue of biologically born men participating in women's sports just has too much evidence against it to justify it as being fair to biologically born women. Within the understanding that none of us have the right to expect everyone else to have to sacrifice and suffer because we chose something, I would hope that those who continually advocate for this unfairness to women would turn to what is true and do the right thing. So feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments, and be sure to hit that like button if you agree. Also, thank you if you already have, but if you haven't, hit that subscribe button, as that would be a great help to me in growing the channel. Hey, as always, I'd just like to say God bless you, and thanks for taking the time to listen. Until next time.